Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel discussion on innovation and startup ecosystem in India and Singapore. My name is Royce Lee and I'll be your MC for today's event. So now let me introduce to you the prestigious panel members that we have today. First up, we are very honored to have with us Mr. Mohandas Pai, Chairman of Manipal Global Education and former member of the Board of Directors of InfoSys of India, to be with us. Mr. Pai is a key player in the development of the information technology services industry in India. And today, Mr. Pai will share with us his insights on the innovation and startup ecosystem in India. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Pai on stage. And next, we have Mr. Girisha Pandey, the Executive Chairman of the Apex Avalon Consulting, who will be moderating the discussion today. Mr. Pandey is well known in Asia, having spent over 3 decades in the region working in senior capacities in a large multinational bank and a global information technology company. Mr. Pandey, please. Also in the panel, we have Mr. Puneet Pushkarna, General Partner, Somak Inc. and Chairman, the Indus Entrepreneurs Singapore Chapter. Mr. Puneet brings a very consultative approach to the business and has been responsible for establishing many collaborative partners programs and strategic partnerships. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Pushkarna. And of course, last but not the very least, we have Professor Gerard, Dean of the Lee Kong Chian School of Business and Lee Kong Chian Chair Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Singapore Management University. And he also serves in an honorary role as International Dean of BML Munjal University, an innovative new university mentored by Imperial and located near New Delhi. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our panel. And right now, may I request Mr. Pandey to kick off the discussion. Mr. Pandey, please.
Good evening. I've been very keen to have a discussion and a panel discussion like this for some time, but you always need the right people who can really liven up the discussion like this. So Mohan Pai and I serve on a common board, and when he was in Singapore, I thought it would be a great idea for someone like Mohan, who's been in the startup business, IT business, to give you a flavor of what's happening in India in the startup industry. We also have Puneet, who is the chairman of TIE here, which looks at the startups around the world. And he has been in Singapore for a long time. And I thought it's a good opportunity to see if we can get a Singapore perspective of how the ecosystem is developing. And of course, Gerry George, the Dean of SMU, and I am an advisory board of the SMU Business School. We thought that because SMU has been focused on innovation and startups, it's a good opportunity to understand how these two ecosystems can be synergized. So let me start by saying why are we talking about this issue today? And the reason we're talking about it is because both countries and many other countries believe that the startups will now create jobs and industries of the future. It's very clear, the policymakers in most countries are clear. The question is, how do we create this ecosystem? Now, India has had for a long time a fairly good and a creative ecosystem. And the Indian initiatives are expected, the Startup India project with the government is now starting, create nearly 3.5 jobs out of the startup system. Singapore too, as we have seen in the Committee of Future Economy, looking at innovation as the main key driver of the next decade of Singapore's existence. So the Committee of Future Economy is talking a lot about startups, and I think the smart nation, the whole issue of smart nation in Singapore is around that, innovation and startup. So I think both countries are in the stage where this is going to be a very key part of their success. Now, the Indian startup industry, I don't want to go in detail because Mohan will talk about it. There are 19,000 startups, nearly $50 billion in the last 10 years have gone into startups. We've had nearly 7-8 startups which have reached a unicorn status. For some of you, a unicorn status means $1 billion plus valuation. So 7 to 8 Indian startups have already reached that level. India is very well connected. Bangalore is very well connected with the Silicon Valley corridor, and we see nearly 1/3 of the new businesses in the Silicon Valley are created by Indians and Indians who are resident there. But why is it happening? So when I look back, and I wrote an article recently on why India is seeing this, and I think there are 3 or 4 reasons. One is it's got a very young and IT-savvy workforce, one of the largest IT-savvy workforce in the world, because India has traditionally had a very large IT industry. And the same skills are now available to startups for new businesses. So that is one. Second, the government itself, the new government especially, is very keen on creating jobs out of startups. So a lot of incentives, lots of new ideas. India now has 1 billion people with mobile phones, of which 300 million have nearly smartphones. So there is pervasive mobility. And that always gives you a digital infrastructure which allows you to think differently, in a very, very different way. So I think some of these, the fact that Bangalore and Silicon Valley have been traditionally connected quite closely, ideas flow through, skills flow through, mobility, is I think what gives the Indian industry not only simple startups, but also startups in what I call deep technologies. There's a lot of deep technologies which are being developed in Bangalore. There are R&D centers in Bangalore by large companies. There are Indian companies who have R&D centers. So there's a lot happening there. And I think it'll be a good idea for Singapore to now link with an ecosystem which is so buoyant. In Singapore, as we also said, there's obviously a shift towards smart nation. And smart nation means not just doing something a little more incrementally, but very differently. And I think that will require Singapore's advantages are all known to the audience, excellent infrastructure, both digital and physical and legal. That makes it a hub for Asia. It's ranked first in the digital infrastructure in the world, so I think we have a great base to start off with. There is a good funding and a financial industry here. And in fact, a lot of large Indian startups are registered in Singapore and are funded in Singapore. So it's already started happening. And I think that's a good start for the two to come together. I also think India and Singapore will have to look at the way the Chinese infrastructure is going. Chinese ecosystem for startups is also very, very vibrant. And I think Singapore, a lot of them are being funded out of Singapore. So we've got the Chinese ecosystem around Shanghai and Shenzhen of startups. So I think we can see the role Singapore can play in these 3 zones, the Valley, Bangalore, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Singapore. So this is the background of why I wanted this debate, because I think everyone should get involved in this. This is going to be the future, and we will see a lot of it in Singapore. So I just thought we should have someone like Mohan give you a presentation on what the Indian ecosystem of startup is, and it will surprise you when you see the numbers and what is going on. So I want him to look at that. Then Jerry and Puneet can tell us how the Singapore ecosystem fits in, creates synergy, adds value to this, or what we have. So we are sitting in the middle of a Chinese ecosystem of startup, Indian ecosystem which is linked to the Valley, and where does Singapore fit in? So without much ado, let me ask Mohan to give his presentation on the Indian startup system, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and then I'll open up to a lot of Q&A, which I'm sure you will have. Thank you.
Thank you, Girija, for inviting me here to speak to all of you. I want to thank Thai for this opportunity. I've been working in the startup area for the last 4 years, and I've been in the IT industry since 1994 when I joined as CFO of InfoSys. I've been witness to the rise of a great company. When I joined InfoSys, we had between $3 to $5 million and 300 people, about $100 million of value. When I left InfoSys in 2011, we were $6.5 billion in revenue, $1.6 billion in net income, $4 billion of cash in the bank, and a $40 billion valuation, and 135,000 people. And today, InfoSys is 200,000 people. And the top 5 Indian companies have revenues of about $55 billion, mostly exports, all exports, maybe 95%, 1 million people, and out of which 800,000 are engineers. It's difficult to find any 5 companies with 800,000 highly trained engineers in any industry around the world. So I saw the rise of InfoSys. I saw the rise of a great IT industry. I'll talk about it. When I joined, they were about $50 million in revenue. Today, they dominate the world. I saw the rise of India. From 1991 till 2016, India has grown at 8.4% CAGR in dollar terms, from $275 billion in GDP to $2.25 trillion in GDP. And India's growth over 25 years at 8.4% CAGR in dollar terms is overshadowed by China, which has grown maybe 9.9, 10%, having started in 1978. We suffered the same problem of socialism for so many years because our founding fathers went to England, were educated, possibly the Fabian School, and shut up shop. And India, throughout our history, had been a free trading nation, except in 1950, after the first government came, we decided the Soviet model was good for us and hurt our country. But now we have an upsurge of entrepreneurship, and I want to talk about that. We're the third largest ecosystem for startups in India. 19,400 startups as of 31st of March. Right now, it could be 21, 22,000, all across in India, and $50 billion invested in the last 10 years. India receives today about nearly $10 billion of equity coming in every single year as FDI, mostly overseas. It's a very large system and spread widely all across India. We raised about, $8.5, $10 billion last year. And in terms of angel and seed funding, we're seeing about $500 million come from within India. It's mostly funded by outsiders, by foreign capital who seem to have discovered startups in India, like foreign investors discovered the Indian software industry. Our capitalistic class is a rent-seeking class. They like to invest in major power plants with banks' money and make them sick and do many interesting things. But now we're seeing high net worth individuals come and invest, seeing this growth, particularly the high valuations some of them are getting because, valuations always drive investment. And we're seeing a massive increase in startups. We have a $175 billion IT industry. The street value of this $175 billion would be something like $275 to $300 billion. $110 billion of exports. The street value is $200 billion because pricing is lower in India. If you take the person hours billed and compare them with US prices for comparable work, you see a very different picture. And just because the work is out of India, you get less credit and the world gets less threatened. 4.25 million people are employed. 1.5 million people out of 10 million people in Bangalore work in the IT, BPO, KPO industry. There are more than 375 research labs in Bangalore, and 450 of the Fortune 500 companies get the software done in Bangalore or possibly have a unit in Bangalore. Bangalore has 125,000 chip designers and testers. I'm told the largest in the world, 185 companies from all over the world who come and do chip designing and testing there. And the rest is software sold in India and hardware sold in India. In 10 years' time, we believe we'll have 100,000 startups, we'll create $500 billion of value, and today we have created value of $80 billion with 325,000 people who are employed, and will be the second largest after the United States. By 2020, Bangalore will have more IT talent than Silicon Valley. Right now, Silicon Valley is slightly ahead, and the confluence of interest between Silicon Valley and Bangalore is almost magical. In Bangalore, we feel closer to California than to Delhi. Delhi is very far away, almost like an alien nation. So this huge industry is going to solve India's problem. The traditional IT industry, service industry solved JP Morgan's problem, Bank of America, BT, and everybody else because they converted the legacy architecture into state-of-the-art web-based software. Whereas these startups are solving India's problems, located out of India, and having so many people do that is going to transform India in the next 10 years. And if you look at this location of startups, you find that Bangalore dominates with 32%, Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai. They're in other places like Ahmedabad, even in Patna in the east of India, in the state of Bihar, which is less developed, in Rajasthan in the west. And if you look at the number of cities where they're headquartered, Singapore is number 4. The 4th largest number of startups are headquartered in Singapore because bad policy in India driven away our companies to come and register in Singapore and re-domicile. and re-domiciled because they found it difficult to move money in and out, to issue certain instruments to raise capital, and they felt that mergers and acquisitions and sales could be easier in India. So we started to work with the government of India, and we're trying to ease many things in the areas of foreign exchange, the areas of let's say, some licensing issues for software and taxation issues, etc. But Singapore comes right there, and this will be a big surprise to many. If you look at the distribution of software of all these startups between various industries, they're very widely spread. E-commerce enablers is 20%, education, into mobile to individual, into the consumer web, gaming, social enterprises, etc. There are basically three kinds of startups. The first kind of startups are deep technology, AI, ML, and based on algorithms or platforms or SaaS. They are great tech companies, maybe 10%. Another 20, 30% companies are software product companies who create IP and sell these products. The balance 60% are businesses with huge technology. For me, e-commerce companies are companies which use technology as a front end compared to traditional retail which uses technology at the back end. So these companies use technology to reach the consumers and for fulfillment, whereas traditional retail uses this largely at the back end. That's why you saw Walmart miss out when Amazon grew up. Now Walmart has got $60 billion of revenues on e-commerce platforms compared to Amazon's $100 billion. So this is widely spread and spread all across India. Startup valuations, well, we had 8 of these companies which are unicorns, and some of them are pretty large. Flipkart was 15 billion, now I'm told it's about 11 million. InMobi is between 2 to 3, and they're doing mobile advertisements. And they're in the payment space, e-commerce space, and in the, let us say, in the hotel discovery space, or in the analytical space like Mu Sigma. Quicker is a company which sells used goods and has a platform like eBay, and that also has grown pretty fast. This is some kind of valuation because I think valuation is interesting to people who want to see how these companies have grown. And these are large numbers, and 90% of equity is owned by foreign investors, overseas investors. They seem to have discovered something very nice in these companies, which our Indian capitalistic class is still sleeping around and doing something else. The top 10 startups across India are varied across various industries, and you can see where they are. They're in SaaS, which are very large, fintech, technology, tech 30, health tech, food tech, and even agri-tech. There are companies now which are in agri-tech, they do interesting stuff. For example, a company in the Nilgiris, in the hills, has a very unique approach. They've taken the test of the soil conditions and come out with this composition, and then using the data based upon weather, they make sure the farmer can provide fertilizer and water at the same time. They run drones over the fields at regular intervals to take photographs and put it into a database, and then based upon the market, they're able to grow lettuce and asparagus and lettuce and supply to the market in 90 days, 100 days, increasing productivity by 40% and prices by maybe another 20, 30%. So agri-tech is coming in a big way. In Mumbai, there's a company which makes the farmer, which allows the farmer to sell directly to hotels fruits and vegetables to the extent of 10, 12 tons a day, being a 6-month-old company. They're broken to the stranglehold of the middlemen. So all over the place, you're seeing these various kinds of companies done by interesting people who are finding challenges in each sector and coming out with a tech solution. Many of them believe that technology is the solution to many of this, whereas many of us believe that business process is the solution. We've got to see which one wins out over time. There have been many successful Indian exits, many of them in bought over, not many listing, and mostly bought over by overseas investors. And they got some decent valuation, but not as much as we would want. We still have an exit problem. Our IPO process was very unfriendly to startups. I chair the primary markets committee for SEBI, the stock market regulator, and we are coming out with norms now which are better than the NASDAQ, which make it easy for people to list. We have a vibrant IPO market. The market capitalization is about $1.2 trillion right now. About 5,000 good stocks are there, and I think we've seen a rise. So if they are able to access the IPO market, we'll see many more exit opportunities. Startup valuation, look at the NASDAQ and the Indian markets, you find that number of companies is 9% in the NSE, the largest market, 22% NASDAQ, 46% of NASDAQ valuation is tech companies. In the NSE, it's 13. So we got a lot of scope for growth because we all know globally the tech companies are dominating in the sweepstakes for market capitalization in the stock exchanges because they are the disruptors, they're creating new models, and they're bringing about change and disrupting traditional businesses. And capital flows to the point where it gets the highest return. So we see, as in the United States, in the area of utilities, traditional industries are becoming a short, and tech companies are becoming long positions, and this is bringing about change. We're seeing a rise in B2B companies too. The story in India has been B2C, like Flipkart and Ola and everybody else. So in B2B companies too, we're seeing companies with revenues of maybe $30, $40, $50 million. About 5-6 years ago, they were $5-6 billion. Now they're coming to $30, $40, $50 million. Some of them are $100 million. And they're very, very interesting. The valuation is growing rapidly. That right now, last time we calculated, was $10.25 billion. And the total startup valuation today is about $75 billion. $50 billion have been poured in. $75 billion is the valuation right now. It could be higher based upon the number of companies because many of them are not counted. But valuation is growing quite rapidly. And we can see these companies in the B2B space too. The digital platform that's available in India is creating magic. Our Prime Minister has come out with the vision of what is called Digital India. And Digital India has a very simple vision. Digital India is about connecting 1.27 billion Indians to the net through a smartphone at a very low cost. And if 1.27 billion Indians get connected to the internet, it will create a virtual nation, which is right now divided by geography. We're a very large country, 3.27 million kilometers of area, and we are very divided among 29 states, multiple ethnicities. But when you're all together on the web, and we have 1 billion cell phones with about 600 million or 700 million Indians who have these cell phones, about 250 million internet connections. When every Indian gets connectivity, comes onto the internet, you're going to see magic. Because we'll be a virtual nation for the first time since civilization began in India in 5,000 years. And once you can transact with each other, you'll see some change. And the change is going to be dramatic because you're going to empower the individual Indian, poor, rich, and otherwise. E-governance will be given to them by the government, so they escape the oppression of the government officials. They will get access to banking and financial services at a very low cost. 250 million accounts were opened by the new government in the last 2 years. And through the mobile to the India stack, you're going to see some very dramatic technological advancements in India. They can get education. We're talking to India to give 150 million tablets to students to get educational content with Wi-Fi and 3G, and to young people in colleges. We got 33 million young people in colleges. All of them have access to a tablet or a device, and they can get educational, let's say, content. It'll have a remarkable increase in quality. Entertainment is available. The movies are available on the web, and music is available on the web, and document is available on the web. So if you have a device, you can access that. And then health is also available. We're trying to create a portal where people can access health longer. There are companies today whereby through the mobile you can take a photograph of your eye and talk to somebody far away, and they will look at the eye and tell you whether you're required to do anything about the eye. They're able to look at your physical condition and diagnose sitting far away. Telemedicine and everything will help improve health services all over. So health, e-governance, financial services, education, entertainment, and then connecting and creating groups. If rural women come together, gossip, and talk to each other about what to buy, what to do, some of you have seen these beautiful ads about Idea and how they talk about the goods that they buy and share. It will create groups which will be magical, because a woman somewhere in Bihar can talk to somebody in Bangalore, can talk to somebody in Kohima in the northeast of India. And these are ordinary people who are seeing an advancement in their lives. A gentleman says, using Google Maps, he headed to a crime scene and made sure something happened there. And he says, I'm not educated, but I know how to respond to queries on the phone. And this person said, I can sell my art. He's an artisan, he's an artist, he's a sculptor to somebody far away. And I can say, I can give a hotspot to somebody, but I don't have 3G. And he says the internet has helped us cut out the middlemen and change their lives forever. Ordinary people in the most remote parts of India are seeing change their lives because they're connected to the web, and it's magical. How will startups be in the future? There are 3 drivers for the startup ecosystem, right? The ecosystem development, smartphone penetration, and the India stack. And the India stack is very, very dramatic. We have something wonderful called Aadhaar. Nandan Nilekani dreamt of an era where every Indian has an identity number. For many of us, identity doesn't matter. We have a bank account, we have a passport, we have some identity. But 600 million people didn't have identity. They're born somewhere, they don't have a birth certificate, and you want to open a bank account, they tell you, who are you, where are you, they don't have an address. They're somewhere in a remote village, right? And they were all farmers, artisans whose thumbprints are all gone. So Nandan came out with this 10-point biometric identification through Aadhaar, whereby he got their iris identification, their thumbprints, and many things else, and made sure they could all come on a common platform, and they got a number. And the database is one of the largest databases in the world. And in 5.5 years, 1 billion people have come there at the cost of $2 billion. Show me anywhere in the world where 1 billion people have been given an identity at a cost of $2 billion in 5.5 years. All of banks with 600 million accounts went on core banking over 10 years at a cost of $4 billion. $4 billion is what a major US bank spends on technology every single year. And all our banks have a common database, one single database, which is state-of-the-art, web-based. So technology has transformed many parts of India. You don't see it because the cities are dirty or infrastructure sucks, and you see all those wrong people there and all those autos and everything. You don't see it. But inside, magic is happening. And Aadhaar is an example. Volunteers have built something called an India Stack, which has been built on Aadhaar. It has been built on Jan Dhan Yojana, and it's been built on mobile commerce. What does it mean? Volunteers came together over the last 5-6 years and create a framework and the architecture for Aadhaar, for e-KYC, because you require KYC to open a bank account, a digital locker where you can keep all your documentation, dematerialize your land records, your titles, your certificates, and everything else, a consent architecture, because when blockchain comes into being and you have a privacy architecture, when your data has to go to somebody and they want to use it, you can send consent to the digit locker, all the information that you want. And by this, which you can do cheaply at almost no cost, you're able to make sure that you can transact and your information can be used. So we are blockchain ready in the financial architecture. And then a GST network is going to come. We're going to get something called GST, Goods and Service Tax. Possibly Parliament is right now talking about it. Hopefully, they'll pass it in the next 15, 16 days. And the IT system is going to be built. For the first time, India will be one common market. Goods and services can go from end to end without warehouses, without checkposts, and you can track it electronically. And the system is being built at a cost of $100 million. Just $100 million. We built an income tax system called Tax Information Network, where right now there are 50 million tax records of people where assessments are done at a cost of $50 million. And they pay about $30 million annually as a maintenance charge. So the India Stack, which consists of Aadhaar, a DigiLocker, e-KYC, e-sign for signatures, and UPI, Universal Payment Interface. Through Aadhaar, I can transfer money mobile to mobile through a bank account without knowing your bank account. I use this number. The number is linked to a bank account at the back end. I don't even know where it is. You give me a number, and I can transfer money through the mobile at almost no cost. MasterCard, Visa charge you 2%. Debit cards, credit cards, all disappear. And the poorest of the poor can transfer 50 rupees without any charge. At the bank end, maybe it is free for the first 2 years. And this UPI technology has been developed by volunteers to an architecture and has been put into a national payment corporation. And this national payment corporation is creating the IT infrastructure for these huge transfers. And these transfers mean a lot to so many people because we have about 70 million people who are immigrants from other parts of India working elsewhere, and they send money to their villages. Right now, it's very difficult to send money. So you're going to send money through a mobile, right to your mother's account in a mobile, and she can go to the Kirana store or the retail store and draw the money. And it's instantaneous at almost no cost. This is going to be magic in financial services. Is accelerated by regulatory innovation. Raghuram Rajan has given licenses for 21 banks in 3 months called payment banks. He's brought about a remarkable transformation. And we had, in 45 years, we gave license to 14 new banks. In the last 3 months, we've given licenses to 21 banks. And many of those banks are mobile companies. You got Bharti with 300 million mobile connections. You got Vodafone with 200 million. And they're gone in for being payment banks. And that's going to change. So, if you look at the India Stack again, commerce, credit from the Reserve Bank, investment from SEBI, which is the stock market regulator, the consent layer, cashless layer, paperless layer, presenceless layer. Now, this is the solution for 6 billion people on the planet. The OECD and the advanced market have got their own financial architecture. It's fairly sophisticated, highly legacy bound, and highly difficult. Try transferring money in the United States to the federal system. It is a bit tough. It takes time. Sometimes it gets lost, and it takes time to retrieve. But here we have a system called the India Stack, which can be used by 6 billion people on this planet at a very, very low cost. Smartphones. We're selling 25 million smartphones per quarter, and the cost of smartphones, thanks to China, is come to 4,000 to 5,000 rupees. Once it comes to 2,500 rupees, we can sell 100 million a quarter. It's the largest smartphone market in the world in terms of number. The value is less because you can't afford to buy an iPhone, but you're getting very good quality smartphones because of China and because of Korea into India. And we believe at least 500 to 600 million people will have smartphones by 2020. It's a question of how the cost comes down and how the penetration is. We are a data-poor country because we don't have databases. Government hardly knows what is happening in the country. They always have surveys which are very old. They don't have data. But with this, the social sector, with the social tech coming up, with e-commerce going on to data, with data platforms, with the payment being digitized, with the paperless process, digital identity, we are going to be a very rich, data-rich country in the next 2 or 3 years. And once you have an enormous amount of data, and the data has an API layer built on top of it, companies which use AI and machine learning can come and use the data to do business, or possibly find patterns and do some very exciting things to optimize. The companies which are using all this algorithm to optimize on local delivery at the last mile. The companies are using it for health purposes to find out health patterns in various parts of the country. And this data-rich infrastructure in the public domain is going to make sure that the new kind of companies come up. To increase market size 10x or 550x, the cost of business has to come down in India. Cost of business is quite high. But cost of business is coming down in the financial sector because we're having something called paperless instant credit markets coming up. There are startups which are creating credit marketplaces. There are payment apps to repay loans and to get loans. There are payment apps for transaction processing, the paperless contracts which are being done with a DigiLocker, and the credit marketplaces where you can put up your data and ask people to bid to give you credit. There are peer-to-peer lending platforms, mortgage switching platforms, and all this coming up with tech in the background quite cheap, and this is making sure that every Indian has access to credit. Credit without friction will bring millions into the formal economy. We believe that 500, 600 million people are outside the credit economy. They don't have access to credit because they don't have data. And the banking system is just about 140,000 bank branches. It's not too large for a country of India's size. But with this technology and things going on the mobile, this is going to change dramatically in the next 2 years. Now, we're seeing the rise of aggregation platforms, the sharing economy, right? And with the sharing economy, you get service providers coming onto a platform, all vendors coming on, product providers in technology, and then you're getting consumers to come on. And because of this increased consumption of digital infrastructure, supply chains are getting digitized, customer behavior is getting digitized, and the customer digital footprint is enabling e-commerce and others to spread. Now, India has 200 million people who are artisans, who are self-employed, who do handloom fabrics, who do sculpture, who do furniture, all kind of stuff. They all suffer because the middleman makes most of the money. For something that is sold at 100 rupees, only 25, 30 rupees goes to the creator, and the balance is eaten away. Now, they can all get web pages in a day. They get access to payment gateway, and through the mobile, they can do businesses. People in New York, people somewhere else. They can get designs, do the work, and dominate. So we're getting startups in the handicrafts area, in the artisan area, connecting consumers and producers, and this is going to increase rural income. And this kind of digitization is taking shape in a very big way. Now, look at this slide. Digitization has led to the rise of new kind of companies, so aggregators, who are bringing together on one single platform providers and consumers of service in a very, very significant manner. We know the largest hotel company doesn't hold hotel rooms. We know the largest transport company doesn't own any taxi cabs. And we know that the largest, let us say, commerce companies don't hold any warehouses. And these are coming because of aggregators. And today, jobs are going to be created because service providers into job providers are coming together on a common platform. Uber has 1.5 million cars and drivers. I don't know what the number is today, 6,500 employees, but they're growing at a very rapid rate. If you look at this slide, Practo is a company from India. 10,000 hospitals are on the platform, 200,000 doctors. So you can go and get a doctor's appointment anywhere, the particular time. They run the doctor's diary, and they got only 5,000 employees. So you get all the medical care done there. But the big thing is, the data about what you do is there in the back end. And the data will lead to patterns with recognition and to see where things are happening. 1.5 million cars, that is Uber. Then we got somebody called Ola locally who is connecting and providing public transport. And we got Paytm, which is a mobile company which is bringing 100,000 merchants together for mobile payments and growing very rapidly. And we got Flipkart and others who are creating 100,000, 200,000 merchants and running logistics. Supply chain costs in India are 14% of GDP. China's is 6%, the US is 5%. So we can't compete because supply chain costs are high. All these people are improving the supply chain and connecting people. And with GST coming on in the next 1 or 2 years, supply chain costs will come down to maybe 7 to 8% in 3 years' time. And that will lead to India becoming much more competitive. So we call it Bharat embracing smartphones. In India, we have a saying, 300 million people are India. They balance 900 of what you call Bharat. These are rural areas, small towns. Now, they are becoming more tech-savvy. And for e-commerce companies, there are more sales in Tier 3 states, Tier 3 towns than in Tier 1. In Tier 3, they get access to a variety of goods. You don't have shops, you can't buy clothes, you can't do so many things. And commerce is coming up in a very big way. Now, there are hundreds of experiments happening. Long ago, an author wrote a book, India, a Million Mutinies. Manipal, V.S. Manipal wrote a book, India, a Million Mutinies. It was a story about India, very negative about India, that India is having another million mutinies today. And these are all startups, innovators, hundreds of experiments. And the reason for that is low barrier to entry, low cost of technology, and a level playing field. And the government is very positive. So we're able to find innovative solutions to India's hard problems. And this robust foundation is being done. And our government now has created a startup policy for startups to make sure startups can have ease of doing business. So you can register a company and get a number possibly in 24 hours. And you can kill a company now maybe in 6 months to a year. And you can get government registrations pretty fast. And you can open bank accounts through the eKYC pretty fast. And best of all, government is creating a $1.5 billion fund to invest in other funds to the extent of 15 to 25% to create a total pool of capital of $5.25 billion to fund all these startups over the next 5 to 6 years. I sit on the investment committee and we drive it. And in the last 6 months, we have committed about $350 million for the fund of fund to many other funds. So they're giving money for funding. They're creating an environment where things can be done. And they said startups are eligible to bid for government contracts. Earlier, for government contracts, you've got to be in existence for 5 years, you've got some revenue. If you're a startup and the definition of startup is given, you can bid for a government contract. You don't require to be 5 years in existence. You don't require to have any revenue considerations. So the government markets also open up. So all these mutinies are happening all over, driven by technology. So I want to pause here and say, one of the biggest experiments in social engineering, in innovation, in entrepreneurship is happening in India. And it's driven by young people in the age group of 21 to 25, 26. 35% of IITs, 10,000 who graduate every year, and 250,000 people sit for an exam where 10,000 get in. 35% of them are becoming entrepreneurs. And many engineering colleges, and we graduate 650,000 engineers every year. About 10% of them want to be entrepreneurs and join startup. They're becoming job creators. They're working 24/7, and they have a dream. And we're going to see an India which is rapidly different. And globally, I want to say it emphatically in Singapore, India missed the Industrial Revolution, occupied by Great Britain. The post-war boom we missed because we messed up. We closed shop at a time when the world was growing. But when the digital revolution takes place, we are right to the heart of it, with a huge IT industry, with great innovation, driven by the young people of the country who are good for the next 50 years. And we are going to be a dominant digital power. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohan. That was informative and quite a bit passionate as well. So Mohan always has a passion about this, and that is one of the reasons I wanted him to talk today to this audience. So before we go on to our other panelists, Mohan, let me just ask you one question. There was a news item today that the digital infrastructure of India, the Aadhaar and others, other countries in the developing world are looking for the same thing. No one wants to sort of reinvent the wheel. We've already done it. We have done it in scale. We've done it in style, I would say, and low cost. Do you think all this is transportable across Asia, Africa, Middle East?
I think so, because the architecture is very simple. It can be done. The process is already defined. The India stack is available for free, driven by volunteers. And the base is National Payment Corporation. It can be given away free at extremely low cost. And it's not proprietary software. It's open source, done by volunteers. And there are a group of volunteers in Bangalore willing to fly out and install it anywhere you want. And they're willing to train any person. Like I said, all this is available for the 6 billion people in the world who lack this kind of infrastructure. And they're not proprietary system. Nobody is going to own it. Nobody is going to own it. Open source has taken off in a very big way. There is going to be no more digital colonization in the world. Even the Google is a dominant power and Facebook is very dominant, but young innovators will come up and disrupt both these companies. For example, the mobile is disrupting Google right now, right? Google is, a little bit apprehensive. So we're going to see this change, and it's available to everybody. And I think that's big news, because we'll create a better world. We'll create a better world because all this is available almost for free.
Okay. So let me move on to Puneet, who runs TIE here. But Puneet, you also are an investor. You've been in the IT industry for a long time across the world, and you invest as Solmark. Now, Mohan has painted a macro picture of what's happening in India and how it's moving forward, and I think it's all very nice. Now, I wanted to ask you the on-the-ground situation when you invest in these startups in India, and some of these startups are in Singapore and elsewhere, run by Indians. Have you found a change? Have you found them to be world beaters, disruptors? What has been your experience on the ground?
So I actually like to make a differentiation, and I've got an academic here who can correct me, between an innovator and an entrepreneur. And I think we have done definitely some amount of innovation, but I think a large part of the work that we do is entrepreneurship. And where I want to draw the distinction between the two is existing models that have been localized, have been implemented with much better things. So a lot of the unicorns that you saw over here, people like Ola, very much like the Uber model, people like Oyo Room, very much like the Airbnb, etc. So I see that that this localization has been done really very well. And I think there is some competitive advantage in that localization that's going to happen. And therefore you have entrepreneurs who do this thing, and then you basically have even funds, people like Rocket, who actually have their model is to take an existing model and basically localize it into 100 other countries. So that part of the thing, I see that, and that's one thing that I look at it and say, innovation is one part, but execution and rigor of execution, that is a very important part. That over a period of time, India has done extremely well. I think the second part of the commentary that I think is that, and while Mohan has painted this picture of this huge tsunami of startups, etc., that is coming through, I think they also want to just pause and say that the initial euphoria is now starting to give to realistic expectations, etc. I think when Mohan pointed to valuation of Flipkart, and he said it used to be $15 billion, it's now at $11 billion. We're going to start to see some of those things definitely come to fore. I think the third part is that as the investment community is starting to become more savvy, where again, what you're starting to see, and I think again, it was pointed out in the numbers there, is that initial gap was filled by a lot of foreign investors. Now the local investors are starting to get into the fray as well, and some of that is actually being done by institutional, but a large part of that is actually being done by angels. And they are getting much smarter about it, therefore. What's happening is that you now no longer are looking at idea with a few PowerPoint stuff, but you're actually looking at the experience of the individual, the team, the leadership, etc. So overall, I think my sentiment is I'm very positive. I think there is a huge potential because I think this transition to digital actually is boundaryless. And so you do not need the domain of large existing legacy to move over there. You can actually jump through multiple hoops, through multiple layers to get into the digital world. And therefore, everybody and anybody can come to play over there. So it opens up the economy a lot. But there is still issues around trust, etc. And that's where, I think places like Singapore, and again, Mohan talked about that, a fourth of the companies are actually registered here, or Singapore is the fourth largest registration of companies here. That is because of the trust issue. And I think that's something that we will eventually have to solve. And some of the inefficiencies in our models, because the trust issues will actually get further acceleration. So for example, in the e-commerce world today, a very large part of the transactions are done on cash on delivery, on COD. But if you can actually trust, like it happens in other parts of the world where you can actually have swipe your credit card and believe in that part of it, you will start to get the next level of efficiency. So trust is the other part that I think has to come in to accelerate that.
So your view is that the mentoring and the investing that you do with the startups that you choose, you will continue to increase the investments in India given the scope of what is going on the ground? You will
absolutely.
see more money coming, not only from you, but many others like you?
Absolutely. I think you cannot escape that. I think there is still the headroom for going after that market is humongous. So we continue to remain extremely bullish to go into India.
Okay. So let me move on to Jerry. SMU has positioned itself as an innovation hub. It's positioned itself for startups, and I've seen a lot of your students and others who keep coming back on the startup journey. Singapore is obviously creating the whole startup community. There's a very strong digital infrastructure, as we talked about, and there's a link to India, given that a lot of Indian companies are listed here. So where do you see the smart nation, the government's view on where Singapore will go next 10 years? How do you see, in line of what you've seen in India, Singapore developing?
That's a very big question. So I think it's very difficult to compare India and Singapore. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah. What we call home here is 20 kilometers by 30 kilometers, and then we are in a different country in 20 minutes after that. So clearly we can't compare 3.2 million square kilometers in terms of scale and the amount of that. So for us, our strategy has to be different. Our strategy has to be focused. Our strategy may involve larger amounts of investment behind it, right? So if you look at any metric, you would see that Singapore has a lot more inputs into innovation, maybe fewer outputs from that. So if you see the index of competitiveness and so forth, in terms of innovation, Singapore is either the first, second, or third in the world in terms of per capita amount going in, inputs going in. But if you look at outputs or outcomes, then Singapore sometimes is 10, 12, thereabouts in the world. So for us, the problem is not about the inputs into innovation. In fact, the government has a very clear strategy in where it wants to focus on. There are 4 areas. The first one would be on healthcare and living. The second one is on urban management, sustainability. The third one is on digital services and so forth. And the fourth one is on advanced manufacturing. And that's where the government says these are the focus areas where we can have value add beyond where our GDP currently sits at. So in other words, if you start in India, pretty much anything can move the needle. But in Singapore, not everything can move the needle. In fact, we can destroy a lot of value by throwing in money beyond into areas where it doesn't get that revenue return. So for us, our strategy cannot be like India. It cannot be broad-based. It cannot be 1,000 flowers bloom. In fact, Mohan's slides were like 100,000, 1 lakh startups. That's, in terms of scale, we're looking at between 200 and 300 startups in Singapore, versus that just doesn't match in terms of scale. But where, even if you take per capita, I think Singapore does better on unicorns, for example. We've had 2 unicorns. But given that we are only 5 million people, the per capita comes out to be amazing, right? So I don't think that is a metric. We are not comparing on that. In fact, our strategy here cannot be on unicorns either. So what Singapore's strategy is, focus on these 4 areas, see how that backends into improving quality of life beyond where we already are. The second one is trying to figure out not unicorns, but in terms of creating enough revenue generating entities that keeps employment more sticky. So encouraging more startups from India to come and register here is not the goal in itself, because it doesn't create stickiness. It creates a flow-through entity, which is good, but that's not stickiness. So for us, our challenges are different. Our challenges are creating stickiness in terms of innovation, creating high-value jobs, which change beyond where we already are, and that cannot be done by promoting scale. That has to be done more focused and developing that. So from that perspective, some of the things in the fintech space where the value additions are higher, that would work in Singapore. But other areas may not quite fit well with where we are going. Right.
Well, one of the challenges, I used to be on the IDA Manpower Council many years ago, and one of the challenges we faced at that time was that there are not many students in universities who go into engineering or technology because accounting and banking and other such things take up the priority. So actually, people who can't get those then get into engineering and software. Now, if there is that continues, and that's the old world, we are trying to bring the new world. And in fact, the Prime Minister many times has said that he wants to see more engineers and the whole lot. Is that going to be a bottleneck?
So
and as a university, how would we solve it?
Actually, there's some good news here, broader for Singapore, maybe less for business schools. The good news in terms of Singapore itself, if you look at the trends over the past 6-7 years, the number of people coming, I know business school data across how many applicants come in and so forth, relative to engineering and sciences. And what we see is that there has been a shift. So over the past 7 years, the numbers of students coming into business school, finance and all of those, has reduced 40%. And that shift has gone into engineering, applied math, and sciences. So that, as a country, is sort of, there's a huge sea change in that number. Am I happy with that 40% reduction as a business school dean? Probably not. But on the other side, the way that we have it here is that only top 30% of students graduating high school who write the A-level exams go to university places. So now what the government is saying is we're going to increase that 30% to 40% so that more people have opportunities at university spaces. And given the shift in terms of going from business to engineering and applied sciences and so forth, I think there's a very positive trend there. So if you fast forward this about 5-10 years out, then you would see a very different mix in Singapore. You will see a stronger innovation base. You will hopefully see a lot more value addition in terms of the type of innovation work that we do here. But I think that shift is happening. It's been happening over the past 5-6 years, but the effect will come out later.
Well, that's certainly good news, because I think skill is a very key part of, and one of the success stories of India is a very large skill base in this area. So before we go into trying to sort of figure out, is there some way the two ecosystems can add value to each other? Mohan, you have an idea, you keep coming to Singapore, you have a good sense of Singapore as well?
Look, I agree with the professor, because India is a world in itself. Let's not compare India with Singapore. Maybe Bangalore, Singapore can work together. 10 million, 5 million, easy to connect, easy to talk. You can't talk to Mumbai, you can't talk to Delhi, you don't understand the language. And India is a very difficult place. You know, anybody from the world can come to India with any theory, find any data to justify the theory and publish any report and talk about India. Such a vast country. all right? And in every continent, you compare with Finland, with Singapore, it makes no sense because there are only two countries with a billion population, India and China. They're in the league of their own. So no solutions are different. But what I would say is, Singapore has a fantastic opportunity to be the bridge in Asia between Japan, China, and India. The Japanese find it very difficult to come to India. They don't understand the language, they don't understand the culture, and they don't trust India. It's very difficult. And the Chinese come, but they don't know how to communicate. We speak English, they speak Chinese, and the gap, the transmission loss is huge. They want to invest. China's economy is slowing down. Japan has got a lot of money, and they're at negative interest rate, and China, is seeing a lot of excess capacity. And Singapore is ideally placed to create the platform to bring people together. You bring people together, you ask them to come and set up headquarters here to invest in each of the countries. The laws and the taxation between Singapore, India, Singapore, China, Singapore, Japan is very good. And it can be the perfect place. And creating the symbiosis, you can connect in the whole of Asia, and this can be the hub where Asia comes together. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And that's where I think you should focus on, because India cannot do it, go to Japan and do something, it's very difficult. China cannot come to India and just take over everything, it's very difficult, they lose all the money. And they got a lot of money to lose, but I think, Singapore is a platform, and you can do that. I think that is a big opportunity. I spoke to Steve today, I spoke to Alex today in Infocom and said, try it out.
Yeah, so just to take this a little forward, yes, Singapore has been a hub for a long time. It had not been a hub for the digital industry, but it has been a hub for all kinds of industry in Asia, and that is one of the things that we have. But how we are trying to grow our own ecosystem of startups, innovation, and the new industries to be. By just being a bridge, which is what we have done very well, and we've lived well on that, you can't create a new industry. So the question is, how do we create some of these new industries?
Just buy them, Girija. You got money, it's so cheap.
No.
You got billions of dollars, spend a few billion, buy them over and ask them to come here and use them. You tell all the value.
So let me give you an idea.
We also have that model, but we'd like to develop our own as well.
So let me give you one suggestion. When I was running TCS, we created a lab in SMU, Urban Solutions Lab for India and China, because Singapore can create solutions which can be very useful for both these countries because they both trust Singapore, the trust factor, and it's state-of-the-art infrastructure anyway, urban solutions. So I think you have to find those kind of niches. Urban areas, clearly Singapore, water, all the things that we do for urban solutions management is where Singapore can add value and create a new industry, like Singapore created a water industry.
Give us $25 billion and what the fund, Girija.
So, Girija, I think, and just on that point, I think my sense picking up from there is, there are some areas that I think we in Singapore can do much better. Areas that are highly regulated. So take the pharma industry, take the fintech area. I mean, on the fintech part, for example, in Singapore, I think outside of the UK, I have not heard of any other place where the MAS, the central bank, has now got an innovation center inside the central bank. You've now appointed a chief fintech officer. Where do you have that at all? I remember, in younger days when that you would actually have to decipher the speak of central bankers. That in itself was a nightmare. So I think areas which are highly regulated, because that's where Singapore can play a part. We invested 10, 15 years ago massively into biopolis and into fundamental deep research in medtech area. That's where we can actually make an impact, because drug discovery, some of those things, biotech areas, eventually if you want to get into the global markets, it needs very heavy duty kind of scrutiny. I think that's where Singapore brand, with our high credibility, can play a very big role. So I think if we identify some of those areas like finance, fintech, pharma and all that, there we actually can play a much better role when we can actually be a very good bridge to labs, perhaps in India, perhaps in Indonesia, perhaps in China, but to come to Singapore with a highly refined infrastructure. And that infrastructure is not just the physical digital infrastructure, but the intellectual infrastructure. Because you are not going to be able to attract world talent to come and move to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to Thailand, to Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. But they would be very glad to come and live in Singapore. So I think when you look at the intellectual capital, you look at the governance capital, and you look at the financial capital, then you have to identify and say which are those industries that where we can actually be innovative and we can actually be the home of. Just like Switzerland did. They did precision manufacturing. Switzerland never did mass manufacturing, but they were known and they made a mark. And these societies like Germany, Switzerland, etc., for very highly sophisticated precision manufacturing. So we then have to find that's what our niche has got to be.
No, that's certainly the route it has to follow. I agree with Mohan that clearly it's not the same. But I'm just trying to sort of figure out, let's take these niche industries, which you talked about, and then we are doing things on it. How do we link up with the Indian ecosystem of startups in these areas, as well as in China? Don't forget, there is a huge startup infrastructure there, which is going on.
Yes. Can I give you a radical idea?
Yes, please. Disrupting.
Disrupting. Put up 10 towers. Each tower has office space for 5,000 people, living space and room for 5,000 people. Get startups from all over the world to come here on the condition you come here, work, innovate, 3-year visa, no permanent residency, stay here, don't go outside an enclave, create great innovation, and if you create innovation, we give some capital and go disrupt the world. We get the world's best talent to come here and leave. Only 3 years.
Okay.
And 50,000 people. And you pick the best and do what you want. And you can create $200 billion of value.
Good. That's one disruptive idea we found today. Jerry, you want to add to it?
But there is some of these ideas that are going around, right? That the idea of cohabiting in terms of working and living spaces. And part of the Gerard district idea is based on this principle. So I think we're thinking about those issues. For us, challenges are very like, in India, the challenges in India are different, right? So for us, if you look at our own sort of demographics, we've got a 92% home ownership rate. So the risk-taking capacity or the risk-taking need is very limited from that perspective. So there is a different cultural change that will go on over the next 10 years in terms of the people here, that the ability to embrace risk, the ability to think very differently. I struggle as a faculty member also for our students to go. Everybody wants to come to Singapore, and Singaporeans love Singapore. But if you ask our Singaporean students, once they graduate, to take up a job in Malaysia, Indonesia, or Vietnam, or they struggle because they'd like to go back for a year and come back, but they'd all. So therefore, this creating companies here that scale up into the region, while in principle is a great idea, is actually quite difficult to implement because there are cultural dynamics here that will take time to change. Right? Do we have to grow at the same rate that India does? No, we don't need to. Right? Will we fall behind if we don't? No, we won't. Right? So therefore, there is this balance of cultural change, but at the same time, we shouldn't lose the edge of aspiration. And I think that is the difficult trick. But the government's focus in terms of saying, here are areas, investing in those areas, creating a 10-year plan in those areas, that would be the right way to do it. For a small city, urban systems becomes very important. We can take this, what we learn here, and scale it up in different places. Same thing in digital services, that's disrupting payment systems, retail, all of those areas, right? So we have to be able to specialize in areas where we can test it out here and then see if we can scale it up elsewhere. Our only two unicorns are in tech, right? So in gaming and so forth. So we have to be able to take some ideas that we can do here and then be able to scale it up elsewhere.
I think there is another area which I see, which is social enterprises. Singapore has a whole system of social enterprises. If you remember, even Coursera was started with a Singaporean in Stanford. And in the social area where we have issues of aging, disability, etc., there are a lot of startups I see in the social enterprise system who are creating new solutions, delivering healthcare, delivering long-term care. So that's an area where Singapore actually can add value to the rest of the region if we can develop some of that. Now that's a little different from a complete free-for-all startup, but it is in social areas.
Yeah. In fact, I agree. In fact, many of our student startups are in that space. We are incubating quite a few that are in healthcare, service delivery, aging, managing care for disabled, a lot of these different attributes that are possible, that you can use Singapore as a test bed. Our biggest challenge is that we won't have scale, but we can develop concepts here that we can then test out elsewhere.
Well, the prototyping can be done here.
Correct. And that we're probably very good at, and I think we can improve on that.
True, true. Okay, we've done a lot of talking amongst ourselves. I'm sure there are a lot of you who want to ask questions. We've got three very eminent people in this area. So let me open the floor to questions. The first one is always most difficult to get. There you are, thank you. Questions so that others can also not statements,
thank you
please.
very much, EP. No, my question is that, Mohan, when you're mentioning about India, digital revolution, that is 20C. We're moving into digital revolution, which India is not yet, into the runway and not even taking off in the mainstream. My question here is that too often you find India, likewise you partner with Singapore on UP project, but you don't even, Singapore does not practice enterprise architecture. How do you want to do it? You want to copy Singapore, Singapore has got a missing link? Now, my surprise when you give the success story, well, one notable one is Micromax, for example. It was a fantastic initial. Then something else happened. Well, going to Brazil and so on is good, but then something wrong. Now, that reminds, luckily, not like Satyam. Now, my question here with regard to India, very much middleware environment. You're not moving very much mainstream. No, not mainstream. Middleware, Satyam, even InfoSys, middleware. Now, are you going to go into mainstream revolution that the big data, the digital era is coming through? Because that is what exactly the most important thing. Are you working still on a startup, on incubator, accelerator modality which 20C? Are you going to work on a new basis that I think the Israelis even not moving to? So the challenge is let's know what you don't know. And the question is that, I'm glad that George was saying that, look, no comparison between apple and pineapple, betel nut and coconut, that's good. That's pragmatic. But the question is that, do you see what is incoming? The question is that India is missing, the link. I'm looking for motivation. The motivation did not come by. So can you help me to understand that? Thanks a lot.
Okay, I think that was a long one. So let me get Mohan to answer that. Are you going to do more of what you did in the past, like front end, middle, or are you going to go into algorithms and data analytics and other such disruptive activities that are going on in the valley?
I think it's happening. I mean, disruptive activities are happening. Like I said, 10% of companies are truly disruptive. 10%. Okay? They're on par with the valleys. In the valley, maybe 30% are disruptive. India is 10%. Maybe 8%, all right? But it's still there. And there's a pretty large number compared to any other country in the world. And let's understand one thing. India is a land of 1 million mutinies. Lot of changes. You're not going to see a Singapore in India, all across India in the next 100 years. It's not going to happen. Okay? But from where we are to where we want to go, we will get there. And where we want to go, maybe 30 years beyond where are you in Singapore today. But that's fine with us. Because if we get to where you are, the waters are going to rise 15 feet and you won't be where you are. Honestly.
Okay.
You won't want us to have the consumption pattern you have or the United States has. The world will be doomed. You want to have a different kind of consumption pattern where the income levels go from $1,500 to $8,000, which is very nice, like China is today. You don't want $25,000 for India. It can't work. There are no resources in this planet. So we're going to have our own thing. The only point I'll leave you with is, we are here A, we're going to go to D in a very short period of time. And it will happen through digitization because we can leapfrog and empower every single Indian. Today, an Indian is not empowered. Many are suppressed and oppressed. You empower them digitally, connect them to the web, get the information, give them access to services like anywhere else, all across the wide country, it will make a great difference in their lives.
I think,
Of course, there are many innovative companies doing all the things that happen in the valley in a smaller way.
yeah. I think what I would add to that is that don't forget that a lot of startups in the valley, which are in, as I said, deep technology and new technologies, have big back offices and research centers in India. No valley company of a certain size will not have an R&D lab in India. Whether it is Facebook, all of them have it. So when there are technologies being developed, they're jointly being developed. Of course, they're their employees, but I'm just saying, so that is happening on the side. I think what Mohan is saying is how India itself, within itself, is using technology. But there is an external link to the valley which is very strong. Okay, another question. So while you think, well, let me ask another question to Mohan. Mohan, this whole issue of link to the Silicon Valley is obviously critical to India. And it is already there. It's established for many years. Do you see this becoming a major growth area in terms of exports and income and startups?
Yes, it is. Let me give some data. There are 6 million people in software in the United States, 1 million are Indians. Not on H1B. H1B is only 250,000. The balance are on green cards are already there. And there are 2 million out of the 4.25 million working for American companies in India. So out of the 8 million working for American companies in software, 3 million are Indians. And by 2000, it'll go to 4 million out of maybe 9 and 9.5 million. That is a dominant share. And if you look at India has 130,000 young people in American colleges, 65% doing post-grad education, master's degrees. They're in all the institutions, and many of them are coming back. They're working in startups, they're working in technology companies, they're coming back. And a generation of Indians who have gone to mid-tier are coming back to India. So the connection between India and the Valley is better than the connection between the Valley and any other country in the world, including Israel. Israel is much smaller. China is also much smaller compared to the Indian mafia. It's very, very strong connection.
That's a nice term, Indian mafia in the valley.
Yeah, I must add that. Absolutely. In fact, when Prime Minister Modi went out and he started this whole digital thing, he actually went to the valley. And in fact, we at TIE were very fortunate that we were actually invited to come and be part of that whole initiative. So I think I second this thing that Mohan said. I lived there for 20 years and I continue to go there 6 times a year. It is both anecdotal and statistically significant that you actually now start to see Santa Clara County today has the highest number of Indian concentration than any other place in the whole United States. And this is evident through the fact that Indian as an ethnicity today are the richest ethnic people in the US. So these things are starting to manifest in terms of idea creation, wealth creation, social this thing. The number of flights, I don't have the data like Mohan does, but the number of flights that have increased between the Valley and India is now 7-fold, you know. So again, these are things that are symptomatic and clear indication of how
$10 billion
trade is
comes
happening.
in. $10 billion of venture capital comes into India. $10 billion, not funny. $10 billion. Whole of Southeast Asia is $1.5 billion. Just a comparison. Maybe China gets more, but 10 billion, you know, there's good money. You should give us 10 billion a year too.
Okay, I see a question here. Yes. Yes.
I've got a very short question. Where are the funding gaps in that $10 billion? Is the $10 billion all going into startups or all going into late-stage growth companies?
See, the funding gap is at seed still. We're meeting maybe 40-50% of what we need. And the funding gap is the Series B. Because large amounts of money are going to few companies. If Flipkart has raised $4 billion, okay? All the e-commerce companies out of that 10 billion have possibly raised 3.5-4 billion. And the balance money has gone to a variety of companies. So at Series B, we don't have enough. Series A, we got 60% of what our needs are. So Series B is a thing. And we still have to come to Series C, where maybe an exit will happen or maybe a listing will happen. So Series B and seed.
Okay. Yes, there's one gentleman there.
2 questions for the panels, actually. First, in your view, what do you think are the respective most important initiatives that each of the government has done to benefit or encourage the startups in your respective countries? And the second question is that what out of these startups, what are the respective failure rates of these startups?
Okay, so let me ask Mohan to handle the
I'll
India
handle
one,
India.
and then Jerry, maybe you can
You
handle
know,
the Singapore.
About nearly
One.
8 months ago, the Prime Minister held a Startup India function in Delhi. On the dais were young startup entrepreneurs. There were 6 secretaries on the dais. And the secretaries were asked to answer the question of these entrepreneurs and give them solution, which they did. Remarkable, never happened before. And we never had young people on the dais with the Prime Minister. All these captains of industry, 25, 30 years, running steel plants, power plants, and all of the plants have been there. But these are young people. None of the recognized faces of the old generation were there. 2, we have a policy called a startup policy. We went to India and said, we want a stay in India policy. We gave 38 points, 34 points have been done by the government in 6 months. Never done before. I worked in this public policy for 20 years. It's never happened before. And 3rd, this India Aspiration Fund of $1.5 billion announced to be a fund for startups. 4th, policy changes, taxation changes, foreign exchange changes, remarkably done. Listing changes, remarkably done. In 1 year's time. And the pride of place has been given by startups. The Prime Minister goes talk startup. Well, nothing much happening in the traditional industry now for the last 1-2 years. But he has given recognition. He has spoken about it. And the Indian people feel a sense of pride. So if a kid says, I want to go to a startup, the mother says, okay, fine, go ahead. And they'll say, no, go get a job. How much salary are you getting? So the attitudinal change, like the professor said, change in mindset is coming. To me, that is very big. And it's where policy is conducive. 5 states have got startup policies. 5 states. Because we got a federal government and a state government, 5 states. And we wrote all the 5 policies because, it's difficult for them to write. So, a lot of things happening.
And I want to add, actually, all this speak is really backed up by real capital. So they announced, PM announced a 10 billion rupee fund, actually, to do this whole...
So that's the India story. You want to take a crack
Singapore
at
is
the
very
Singapore
simple. I think
plan?
we've got the most favorable startup environment anywhere in the world, right? In some ways, I would say the government probably does a bit too much. But I don't think we have a choice otherwise here, right? There are clearly incentives. It's very easy to start. There are clearly grants and support for you to get up to, I think, $250 million in investment, at least in the... So you go through the seed stage very easily with a blink of an eye, you can go through it. I think our challenge comes not in the startup phase at all. I think in fact, we are seeing a lot of interest in the startup phase. Our challenge comes in the scale-up phase. Our challenge comes in the human capital, or in terms of flow of entrepreneurs who've done successful exits and then moving on to create other exits, other scalable enterprises. We still don't have that fluidity. Our concentration of wealth is very different. Our concentration of wealth is because of real estate, because of financial assets. And so there is a change in mentality on how you would create startups, scale it up, and leave these companies and then start new ones, right? We're still not there yet.
Doc, access the engineering talent of India. The United States has got 2 million people working for them in the outsourced companies, enormous engineering talent. So you can scale up products much better, do it at a much lower cost, have better quality. The quality output is fantastic. The UK has great design. And I've been telling them, get the Indian, they always come and complain, we can't scale up, we don't have talent, we don't have engineering. They don't have enough engineering. Yeah. Access India. Ask all your companies to come set up engineering offices in India to do the product and the engineering and all that, and you can attack the globe. You got money, you got brand, and you got a lot of stuff.
Correct. So this is similar to where we are going, or we are thinking of at least. So for our students, what we've just gone to India 3 months ago and signed an MOU with IMA and ISB and so forth, with the idea that we would have startups here, go there, and work with the tech city, what is the Hyderabad one, T-City? Yeah, that one. And then try to build up that capability of scaling up. The same thing we've got with China as well. So for us, given our access to both, we've got something with Zhejiang and Shanghai and so forth, trying to get that excitement of scale up as a possibility.
Okay, let's start taking the last 2 or 3 questions. Yes.
Mr. Pai, you talked about going from A to D as opposed to A to Z. And so what challenges do you see that would hamper going to A to D. I see, because you talked about digital India, and I'm talking about physical India. So the challenges I see are power, water, roads. So I wanted to understand two parts of my question is, do you agree with the challenges I listed out? And if you do, what do you think we can be done about it? Do you think there are any innovations in digital India that can help with the challenges in physical India?
Well, first let's answer one question. There'll be a 60% failure rate. I've been on record to say 60% of all startups will fail. That's fantastic. 40%, 20% may be zombies laying there. If 20% do well, we are great. And 10% go up 10x, you made all your money, 10x, 20x, and whatever x it is. So, 60%, I'm sorry, I didn't say that. And if the fail is very good, because you need failure to understand what to do next. And India, we had an aversion to failure. We are safe, right? Like possibly you are. So these young kids failing and doing things again and again. Now we hear some startups are hiring people who have failed twice. They want to do better. Now, yes, physical India and digital India are two different things. Digital India will be far ahead of physical India. Physical India is a tough India. But we've seen great progress in the last 2 years. I'm so happy. In power, we have 300,000 megawatts of power. We're just utilizing 165,000. We had a transmission problem, and India has power surplus. Also power surplus because the purchasing power is low. All villages will be electrified in another 1.5 years, and we're going to have power flowing to a national grid in India in the next 6 months. There's a national grid in the west, east, and the north, not in the south. South has got only 5,000 megawatts. And by 2022, we'll have 100,000 megawatts of solar energy put in there. Our total alternate energy will be 35% by 2025 in India. So our coal use is going to come down with alternate energy. And we're getting very cheap solar panels from China. They're killing themselves to give us more panels, which is fantastic. And the cost of the solar energy is equal to grid parity right now. And I'm told it's going to come down more. So in power, we're quite okay. We're not consuming much, we're quite okay. Second, in terms of water, right? Yes. Maybe 60-70% of India has access to clean water, and there's a drive to give them clean water. Hopefully it will happen. And we have a problem about treatment of sewage and waste. Money is coming into the smart city project to do that. It will take 10-15 years. The Ganga is going to be cleaned up. It's become dirty. They're spending a lot of money. We've got a separate minister for that. She's a fantastic person who does not know what to do, poor thing. But she's trying her best, and hopefully she'll muddle through. And I think the water thing we are doing. In terms of railways, we're going to spend $150 billion for the next 5 years to refurbish. But $150 billion is what China spends every year. But 150 is better than 50 that is spent in the last 5 years. Roads, we're building 18 kilometers of roads, want to go up to 40 kilometers of highways. These are all 4-lane, 5-lane highways. We're spending more money than ever. And in the last 2 years, a huge increase has taken place. Our ports are now working much better. Goods are moving faster. So we will have, in the next 5 years, a better transport system, a common market for taxation. We'll have better power system and better water. Will we be 100% of what it is? No. We may go from 20 to maybe 50% in 5 years, but that increase is going to be dramatic. Yes, in Bangalore, there are 66.5 million vehicles for 10 million people is a gridlock. We need 250 kilometers of metro. 42 is going to be there by this year end. 72 is started, and we're asking for 125. By 2025, you may get it, by which time you may need 300. Our challenge is we're 10 years behind what we need. If we come up to 5 years, I think it's fantastic. It's happening. And now there is unanimity among everybody. The physical infrastructure has to come up. I'll give you another instance. 50 million LPG gas connections are going to be given to poor women in the next 3 years. Do you know what it means to this poor woman? She's burning cow dung and wood and all, and smoke goes into her lungs and she dies young. Now she's going to get a free gas connection. It's already started off. 50 million. Show me any country which does that. So it's happening.
Most countries don't have 50 million.
Yeah, 50 million. Yeah. So it's happening. The problems are huge, but now I think it's happening.
Okay. Let's take the last question.
Beg your pardon?
The second part of my question
What is that?
was what innovations do you see in digital India that can be...
See, what Digital India will do is bring in transparency and connect people. For example, JAM. 250 million accounts have been opened. Accounts, money can be transferred on a mobile phone. And the government is putting subsidy and everything into their account. Money was being eaten away. They have saved $5 billion last year because they give grants and subsidies directly to women in the bank account by account transfer instead of to the shops and everything else. Okay? And that database is now creating a huge ability to control. They've given them life insurance product, medical insurance product, and everything because the government is dealing directly. This is innovation on an extremely large scale. Technology innovation. They're creating telemedicine and telecenters in many parts of India as a pilot so that you can get access to the best doctors, because data proves to Practo only 30% of a tertiary doctor's time is actually being used. If you go 60%, you get the best medical help. It's happening to the mobile, it's happening to wireless, and it's happening. For it to get scale, it will take 5-7 years.
Okay, so there's a question here. I think the lady, this is the last question. I think if some of you want to ask questions, or Mohan and others, after the event, we can probably talk to you all. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, gentlemen. The question I have is not really specific to India, but I'd like to use India as an example because I've read of a few cases there. So a lot of money comes from overseas, as you said, and 2 examples have been cited for the reasons why we are seeing a little bit of some of these large startups starting to lose their valuation. For example, startups like Flipkart concentrated too much on revenue, and they didn't really, if you ask them what was the profit you were making on a certain item, they didn't know. It was all about revenue. Another example for some of the mistakes that we are seeing is they were forced too much into expanding too quickly regionally rather than execute very well in one city in India before being forced, or the demands by the VCs were expand as quickly as you can. I think one very high profile grocery store startup was affected by this. So my question to you is, do you think startups need to change the way they have behaved in the past? Will this affect the funding they will get from the VCs? Or just your thoughts on how should startups think going forward so they can continue to be robust instead of get into the situation they're in now? Thank you.
You know, startups have no failure, it's only strategy. Everything is strategy. Please remember that. That's what professor teaches you at SMU, right? It's all strategy, no failures. Okay. As in other parts of the financial system, valuation goes ahead of value creation. Then valuation falls, value is created. Sometimes value is ahead of valuation. So money pours in. So it's an up and down curve. Last year money poured in, driven by this image of India as 1 billion consumers, huge money, winners take all, Nilesh Arora coming, SoftBank putting money, hype, and all this media making heroes out of nobodies, everything. Suddenly the money fell. They all become zeros and they'll fail, this, that, blah, blah, blah. And valuation comes down. Now the value will go up in the next 1 year because they're going to create value growing at 100%. So these are normal terms. They will all learn. And if they fail, it's perfectly fine. I mean, SoftBank is going to lose his money. It's okay.
Okay. Jerry, you wanted to say something? Last.
It's just that many startup categories are winner-take-all categories. Right? So therefore, if Uber is here and they're competing with Grab, I don't think Grab makes money in every market, neither does Uber, right? So, but the way they compete is to make sure that the network effect is so large that they're then able to monetize it later. That's the strategy. But the problem is money runs out in between, and they don't foresee the amount of cash that it's going to drain. So some companies lose out because they ran out of money. But would the strategy itself work? It should, right? In many cases, it does. And that's, I guess, the result, right?
Okay, I think we've had a very hectic, exciting, passionate discussion. I expected that, nothing less. And I hope you all enjoyed some of the issues that were raised. I think for a lot of you, you probably saw the Indian ecosystem for the first time, the scale of what is going on. And I think it's probably good for everyone to know. We also wanted to see how Singapore gets into this ecosystem, India and China. So that was what we wanted to do, and I hope our panelists here have done a great job in covering that topic. May I request all of you to give our panelists a hand of applause. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. And now on behalf of SMU, I'd like to invite Professor Jerry George to present a token of appreciation to all panel members. So Professor George, please. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for Mr. Pushkana, Mr. Pai, and Mr. Pandey. Ladies and gentlemen, another big round of applause. With that, we have come to the end, and thank you everyone for attending today's panel discussion. So we'll also appreciate it if you could spend a couple of minutes to fill in the comments card and pass it to any of our IIE staff on your way out to the dinner reception. So with that, thank you so much and have a great night ahead.